So you're in Menlo now, like back in the incubator?
I am back in the incubator, yeah.
What's that like, incubator life? Did you even go through an incubator before?
No, this is my very first time, and it's quite a big adjustment. I must confess, I really do like my office, way more than this type of stuff. But it's a good place, it's easy. We have a few desks, and so it makes it easy to have things around. You don't have to, have your own kitchen and all these type of things. It's all there.
Yeah, and there's some energy, right? There's some stuff you can overhear that's always funny. I like incubators. It's kind of like a little bit of everything. Yes, but more importantly, like you're back, fully in the database game. I mean, you could say that you never left, but you did some time at Oracle. You were at MongoDB. Now you're helping out at MariaDB.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to chat with you because we both went through the NoSQL phase.
Yes.
And I just realized this morning that we had like very, very different opinion as to like, what that trend was about and whether or not it actually succeeded or failed or whatever that even means. And so I wanted to get that on camera because I was in there at Cloudant and I helped out with a few other companies. You were in there at MongoDB. It was a big thing. I was a firm believer of NoSQL in a technical sense and a business sense, and I kind of feel like it didn't really deliver everything that I hoped for it. But this morning you were telling me, you were like, no, NoSQL succeeded. So like, I want to hear that out, and I want to talk about like in general, I guess, how those tech trends can like succeed and fail, and what that even means in Silicon Valley.
Yeah. So I think NoSQL succeeded. I think there was a hype phase in which people thought that everything was going to be NoSQL. I never believed that. I mean, that was that was a little too much. But just as a general statement, I think that NoSQL actually has succeeded. I think there's several companies that are going to be very successful and are being very successful in this space.
Right.
I also believe at the same time that relational databases will continue to be the workhorse, of the database industry. But where NoSQL has succeeded is, I think that relational databases for a while sort of took a step in place. They were what they were, and there was very little innovation. They didn't know how to talk to developers anymore. And so I think they lost some ground, there.
Right, that's the kind of part about it that I feel like failed. But, looking at the start of it, I felt like from a technical standpoint, there was a real chance for it to kind of really take over, because we had the relational database as a standard for like many years, but before we used relational database, we used a lot of like different things before, right? So it felt like, why not change that again, right? Why not have a new entrant? Why not have NoSQL become the new standard, the way like maybe self-driving cars are going to be the new standard, in the years to come. And that didn't quite happen, right? Let's put it like this. And so from a technical standpoint, I kind of felt like there was an opportunity lost, but then also from a business standpoint, that lack of cooperation kind of really prevented it from really making a dent in the market, from really getting a lot of adoption in the enterprise. And I kind of feel a bit of a letdown there, right? So how do you feel about those two aspects, or the technical aspect and the business aspect of it?
So a couple of things. I mean, you and I were on stage, in the very, very beginning of the NoSQL.
The very first event, Not the very first event, but
like one of the first, and the thing that I found very interesting is I was on stage with, 6 or 7 other vendors, and they were all attacking each other, and I was looking around me on stage, and I was going like, amongst us, amongst the vendors on stage at that point in time, we barely had, maybe $5 or $10 million of revenue, and so for me it was always about, we're trying to make a market, and so what you do is you collaborate. All the various different vendors on stage had different use cases that they supported better, and some that they didn't support as well, and but it was more about the notion that relational didn't have to be everything. Relational is very, very good for most things, but there's some areas where it's not as good, and that's where NoSQL has a very legitimate place. From a business perspective too, I think what people sort of underestimate is that it takes a long time for people to change to change their development practices and to adopt new technologies. This is not something that happens in a couple of years. This takes easily a decade. I mean, Oracle was, if I remember correctly, was founded in 1984 or something like that, and only in 1990 did they have the first viable product. This was 5-6 years. Now things have changed. Development goes faster. There's more things available. People are more productive, but still it takes a long time before things become available. So
there's a few things to unpack here, right? The first thing is I do think there wasn't a long enough runway, I guess, for a lot of these companies or for the space in general, right? Because it would take a lot of time to change trend in the enterprise. That always does, right? Even you look at containers now, JavaScript, things that are really, really hot and are getting like really good traction. It always takes a long time to get to that core revenue, right? That's powering a lot of those technical trends. Then the other thing is that the infighting, and you could say, for example, that's also happening with containers right now. Where all you hear about like rumors of a split in Docker and all those kind of vendors kind of like backstabbing each other and trying to do competing things when container as a market isn't completely cemented yet, right? Or even as a tech trend, forgetting the market for a second. And I kind of feel like that's kind of something we did wrong in NoSQL, where we felt like, for sure it's going to happen. So it was a question of who was going to get the bigger part of the pie, right? That's how every company felt, like maybe on the inside of like, well, NoSQL is going to be the new standard. I just want to be the 50% vendor of NoSQL, as opposed to like, let's cooperate, make NoSQL happen on a large scale. And then after that, or in parallel to that, we can focus on like building our own differences, our own stack, our own message.
Yeah. I think what I tried to bring, like at the time when I was at Mongo, what I was trying to really bring, and Mongo team, like themselves were very focused on this, was not to be focused too much on the competition, but more focused on customer success.
Right.
And I think that in the open source world, like there's often a lot of sort of religion around like how to do open source and how open source are you, and there's all these litmus tests, like how on the open source scale, how open source are you, like are you this open source, that. And I think it's at some level it's immaterial. I think that what's very important is to be customer focused and to be customer success focused. And I think if you look at the success of the companies that are going to make it in the NoSQL space, what you'll find in common with them is that they have good technology and they solve certain use cases really well. But in addition to that, they've had a maniacal focus on making sure that their customers are being successful. And I think specifically, like in the NoSQL days, I think one of the things that was done really well there was the initial focus on developers, making developers productive. And then those developers, as they started deploying it and starting to use it for significant use cases in the enterprise, at that point in time, they started then they became customers and started the revenue. And that's what you're seeing now. So I think that, for NoSQL, I think, again, there's going to be 2 or 3 companies successful, and I think they're going to be, they're going to do well. Right.
That customer success is kind of really key, right? And it makes sense because even the trend like around you kind of crumbles or doesn't get as big, if you actually deliver value and you actually get paying customers, you probably, make it. You may not be as big as if the wave really caught on, but you'll still get somewhere. So that's kind of a good one. But so
it's sort of the land and expand, kind of
exactly,
strategy.
right? And you can do it on your own individual level, even if the rest of the field doesn't really cooperate in that way. But so let's talk about larger success, right? So what do you think, NoSQL did succeed at on large scale? I mean, it definitely kind of forced people to reconsider their use cases, to think about different ways of doing data storage, right? So from a technical level, I do think it evolved the conversation quite a bit, but what are some of the other kind of lasting success or lessons from NoSQL?
It's funny because, if you think about relational databases store, maybe 10% of the world's, database data, and that number hasn't really changed a whole lot. Even, with Oracle's dominance and with other vendors' dominance, in that space, the amount of data the amount of sort of transactional databasey data that was stored in databases, in relational databases, never was as large as, you would imagine it to be. It's never like 80% or 70% or anything like it. It's just like always sort of 10%. I think what NoSQL has done is they have consolidated, in a way they have fragmented part of the RDBMS market because people are, for certain use cases moving away from RDBMSs, and it has cemented an area where there was a lot of fragmentation, a lot of files, a lot of, sort of ad hoc databases before. So I think that's what's now happened. I think you're going to have a document store, you're going to have sort of a Cassandra style, like store, and you're going to have relational. And I still maintain that relational will continue to be the vast majority of databases because relational is exceptionally good at, most use cases. Like at the very edges of it, there are other technologies that do better than relational, but if you have a general purpose at really, really significant scale, relational is just awesome, and I think there's a lot of innovation that can be done there.
And I'm not saying we should have gotten rid of relational, right? I think as a useful engineer, it's kind of like you want to take over and change everything, but in hindsight, like it isn't necessarily like worthwhile on a technical level or in a business level. But so I guess the larger thing of NoSQL so far, not that the movement's done yet, there's still companies doing well, is that, maybe NoSQL didn't remake the database world in its image, but it did create a new normal, right? The market now is different. Like people's behavior toward their data is different, and it creates opportunities for companies, not just in the NoSQL category, but also in analytics and in-memory processing and all kinds of connected areas, right? Big data, machine learning.
Absolutely, and all of those, a lot of those will be powered by like all kinds of different technologies, including relational, but also including non-relational. One of the things was that, when we sort of got started with the NoSQL movement, it was very interesting because at that point in time, if you were to go to your boss and you say like, hey, I'm going to store my data in Redis, then like people would go like, are you on crack? Are you like completely insane? Like this is because the question was, is it going to be MySQL, Oracle or any of those guys? But like Redis or or Mongo, are you insane? And now it's actually a very it's a choice. It's an option for certain types of use cases, and I think that's the right thing to happen. So I think that is success actually. To me,
it is. You're right. It's it's not necessarily like a personal success for the trend. Like the trend didn't take over the world, but it did create like a new situation, a better situation. And I think the companies, to your point, that were kind of ready for that were ready, whether NoSQL was going to win or whether NoSQL was just going to like change things or falter. I think they're the one that end up sticking around, and so that's maybe the best way to kind of think about a trend and how to like live within it, right? Is you got to be ready to live on even if the trend doesn't succeed, at the highest level of your expectation.
Sometimes I think that maybe the trend was pragmatism, because what happened was that people had use cases and they were trying to shoehorn them into certain existing solutions, and at the same time there were people going like, what, this is we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to build alternative solutions for this, and there's a certain type of pragmatism that's embedded in that I actually really appreciate, and it's happening. So
and same thing for the vendors that were able to have that pragmatism.
Absolutely,
and recognize
and
it.
make non-traditional choices, like basically.
Absolutely. Well, cool. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.